Grand Existence. I'm Nicholas Jensen Denton, the creator of JD's Pharmacopoeia. Good evening. It is 10 something o'clock on May 8th, 2023. And existence is grand. Welcome, denizens of the universe. I am here before you today, as always, to bring forth a little bit of esoteric and occult knowledge. That is knowledge which the elites, which the tyrants of reality, the spiritual wicked forces in high places, the evil, I could go on, the motherfucking Illuminati does not want us to know, which they have been keeping, sequestering, holding on to, turning into fantasy, turning into fiction, into dramatized stage play, foolishness. They've turned this into this great esoteric and occult truth of the universe, which I'm about to reveal to you. That's the only reason why JD's Pharmacopoeia exists. It was always about alchemy, and it was always about speaking my truth and allowing my truth to have some sort of objective foundation, which was plants that we all can agree exist objectively somehow, and using them kind of as a conduit for what I'd like to say. But what I'd like to say has always been said with and without the plants. Alchemy is probably one of the oldest spiritual, extant, dare I say, traditions in the world. It is independently arisen across multiple continents since time immemorial. If that doesn't show you the universality of something, then I don't know what does. Perhaps the notion of anarchy, which seems to be another common human tendency, but that's a discussion for another time. At any rate, all I've ever tried to do is translate, or even say, because they've done been translated, I've been trying to modernize and acclimate the ancient teachings on metaphysics, what I sometimes call the knowledge of the ages, or what Aldous Huxley called the perennial philosophy, which is another great book you should read. I am simply trying to modernize, or perhaps that's the best word for it, to modernize this knowledge for the everyday layman, because it is this knowledge, my fellow denizens of the universe, it will liberate our entire species. It will be. It was. The way I see it is aliens came to the world a long time ago, highly intelligent beings, unfathomable to our current consciousness, and they delivered that funkendating component of civilization, society, organized culture, of art, of creation, of engineering, of all the things that make humanity special. Whether that was in the near distant past or the even further not near distant past is up for debate. Regardless, what we know is that there is an advanced level of knowledge on the planet. It deals with the metaphysical, that which is of consciousness, that which is unseen and only felt, non-sense bound, not bound by the senses, but that which is beyond, transcendent, extraordinary, to say the least. And so the short story, which I'm about to read by Jorge Luis Borges. Confession, I don't actually know how to pronounce this. Borges. I'm going to call him like Jorge Borges. Okay? So, The Aleph was a book recommended, a short story, 11 pages, recommended to me by my teacher because we were talking about all the real shit for a couple minutes there. And I was like, well, have you read this? And he was like, nah, but have you read this? And I was like, that sounds important. Have you read this? And he was like, nah. But so we went on like that for a minute. And so we produced some good information. And I finally got around to reading it the other day. And it seems very clear to me. I'm going to give my synopsis in the beginning. That way, when we go through it, you can just listen. You can go with my perspective. But if you don't want to listen to my perspective about what the whole thing means, then skip forward for the love of God, for the love of your first time reading a short story experience. So basically, I think that, it's pretty clear. If you know what's going on, if you understand the symbolism, then the story tells itself. But if you don't understand the symbolism, which is where I'm coming from in this, because my teacher said he didn't understand the symbolism, and frankly, I find that hard to believe. But maybe he is telling the truth. I'm open-minded skepticism, right? The way of the scientist. So, I read the Aleph, as it was originally called. And it is speaking to, it alludes to the mystical rites, I guess you could say, or the principal philosophies of alchemy and Kabbalah. It talks about Ein Sof. It talks about foundational mystical teachings, essentially. The Aleph, if you're not aware, there's a lot of books about mysticism out there, and some of them are considered foundational, and I'm kind of obsessed with those books because I want to know what the deal is with life. And so I consider myself a truth seeker, and I read all this stuff because I need to know what other people are thinking, because frankly, I don't know. Or do I? So there's 3 foundational texts in the Abrahamic mysticism. They call them the Sefer Yetzirah, the Zohar, which is all my recommended reading, and the Bahir, that is the Book of Formation and Creation, the Book of Splendor, and the Book of Brightness. Now, I'm assuming Borges got at least some inspiration from the Zohar in particular, because a massive portion of it is simply going into the explanation of the reasoning for the alphabetical order in the Hebrew language. Why specifically the Aleph, which is the first letter in Hebrew, is the first letter. Like, why does the alphabetical order matter, and does it? Well, these are books on numerology, symbology. They describe alphanumeric codes that are apparent throughout the world's holy literatures, and it basically says that the world is created out of the Hebrew alphabet, and that the Aleph is the foundation of the world. I just think that they're fascinating texts. They put us in that unique perspective of the mystic, the mystical experience specifically, which is the other thing that I was kind of obsessed with. Because that's where scientific progression lies. The unknown. We must explore the unknown if we expect to, I believe, move forward as a species. So, like, from my point of view, most mystics from biblical times and before biblical times typically agree that language itself is a form of magic. And so, basically, what we have in these, what am I going to call the fluctuating periods of enlightenment throughout history, which don't just occur during the European Renaissance. Like, people say Renaissance and they just immediately think like 1700s, Rene Descartes, and like that ilk. And that's just, it breaks my heart, because the Renaissance been started, like I said, when the funkendating component came into reality, whatever that agent was. And so it seems that throughout all of these Enlightenment eras, which there was a handful of for at least the past 13,000 years, 12,000 years, 12,500 maybe. There seems to be a common Enlightenment principle, I guess you could say, and it's the idea that there is a lost, perfect knowledge in the world, a lost, like some sort of set of principles about the universe and about how reality is constructed from the state of nothingness and chaos, and how that is brought into order and brought into manifestation as the living entities that we are here now, as the orbiting planets, as everything itself. And there is essentially, every tradition has some sort of illusion to this perfect knowledge. And more often than not, this knowledge is represented as a perfect, universal language, a language which can be spoke, which can be read, which can be written, obviously, if it can be read. And that's really the origin of many different mystical systems, this universal language, which is often put straight into symbol, it's put into word, it's put into number, it's put into combinations of all of those. That is the reason, I believe, of different religions, different sects. You know, there's 33,000 different sects of Christianity alone. You know, the Protestants and the Huguenots and the Catholics, like, why do all these people go to war against each other? Well, they're going to war over the knowledge of this original language. And it's basically the language of the genetic code, you could say, and of epigenetics. Because all is mental, and when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. That's also in the Bible. So I say things that are in the Bible because it's like, if it was legit enough to make the final cut, then it's probably got a little bit of truth to it. And the propaganda in there, to me, is just so clear and evident that people should be okay with me. I feel like people should be okay, or at least I have the explanatory power to explain why it's okay that I am quoting the Bible sometimes, even though I talk so often also radically against it. But at any rate, it's like the Renaissance people of all time have been trying to re-attain this universal language, this original knowledge, which was said to be around before mankind's fall from God's good graces. The Adam and Eve story, as some of us know about it. Paracelsus talks about this a lot in his work, The Aurora of the Philosophers, also on my recommended reading list, but other places as well, throughout the Nag Hammadi Codices and the Dead Sea Scrolls. Check out the first and second books of Adam and Eve. They're really informative, and everything about the creation of man. And furthermore, the culprit in question today, which is this 11-page short story, which I've spent way too much time talking about already. So I'm just going to actually read it now, and hopefully I experience no technical errors, for the love of God. Now, this book is called It is called, let me pull it up again, The Aleph. As you know by now, I'm just going to put me in the corner, if I can. Infinity. Look at that. Beautiful. And I'm just going to come over here. So, without further ado, The Aleph by Jorge Luis Borges. Oh God, I could be bounded in a nutshell and count myself a king of infinite space. That's from Hamlet. Verse 2, play 2, I don't know. Roman numeral 2, comma, number 2. But they will teach us, here's another quote from Leviathan 4:46. But they will teach us that eternity is the standing still of the present time, a nunc stans, as the schools call it, which neither they nor any else understand, no more than they would a hic stans, for an infinite greatness of place. I can't comment on this because I don't know what a hic or a nunc stans is. Maybe I said that wrong too. Please, sorry about any kind of mispronunciations on this. Bear with me. On the burning February morning, Beatriz Viterbo died. After braving an agony that never for a single moment gave way to self-pity or fear, I noticed that the sidewalk billboards around Constitution Plaza were advertising some new brand or other of American cigarettes. The fact pained me, for I realized that the wide and ceaseless universe was already slipping away from her, and that this slight change, which was the first of an endless series. The universe may change, but not me, I thought with a certain sad vanity. I knew that at times my fruitless devotion had annoyed her. Now that she was dead, I could devote myself to her memory, without hope, but also without humiliation. I read that weird. Let me say it again. I knew that at times my fruitless devotion had annoyed her. Now that she was dead, I could devote myself to her memory, without hope, but also without humiliation. I recalled that the 30th of April was her birthday. On that day, to visit her house on Garay Street and pay my respects to her father and to Carlos Argentino Deneri, her first cousin, would be an irreproachable and perhaps unavoidable act of politeness. Once again, I would wait in the twilight of the small, cluttered drawing room. Once again, I would study the details of her many photographs, Beatriz Viterbo, in profile and in full color. Beatriz wearing a mask during the Carnival of 1921. Beatriz at her first communion. Beatriz on the day of her wedding to Roberto Alessandri. Beatriz soon after her divorce at a luncheon at the Turf Club. Beatriz at a seaside resort in Quilmes with Delia, San Marco, Porcel, and Carlos Argentino. Beatriz with the Pekingese lapdog given her by Villegas Heido. Beatriz front and three-quarter views, smiling, hand on her chin. I would not be forced, as in the past, to justify my presence with modest offerings of books whose pages I finally learned to cut beforehand so as not to find out, months later, that they lay around unopened. Beatriz Viterbo died in 1929. From that time on, I never let a 30th of April go by without a visit to her house. I used to make my appearance at 7:15 sharp and stay on for some 25 minutes. Each year, I arrived a little later and stay a little longer. In 1933, a torrential downpour coming to my aid, they were obliged to ask me for dinner. Naturally, I took advantage of that lucky precedent. In 1934, I arrived just after 8 with one of those large Santa Fe sugared cakes, and quite matter-of-factly, I stayed to dinner. It was in this way, on these melancholy and vainly erotic anniversaries, that I came into the gradual confidences of Carlos Argentino de Neri. Beatriz had been tall, frail, slightly stooped. In her walk there was, if the oxymoron may be allowed, a kind of uncertain grace, a hint of expectancy. Carlos Argentino was pink-faced, overweight, gray-haired, fine-featured. He held a minor position in an unreadable library out on the edge of the south side of Buenos Aires. He was authoritarian but also unimpressive. Until only recently, he took advantage of his nights and holidays to stay at home. At a remove of the two generations, the Italian S, which must mean something phonetically, I don't know. The Italian S and demonstrative Italian gestures still survived in him. His mental activity was continuous, deeply felt, far-ranging, and all in all, meaningless. He dealt in pointless analogies and in trivial scruples. He had, as did Beatrice, large, beautiful, finely shaped hands. For several months, he seemed to be obsessed with Paul Fort, less with his ballads than with the idea of a towering reputation. He is the prince of poets, de Neri would repeat fatuously. You will belittle him in vain, but no, not even the most venomous of your shafts will graze him. On the 13th of April, 1941, along with the sugared cake, I allowed myself to add a bottle of Argentine cognac. Carlos Argentino tasted it, pronounced it interesting, and after a few drinks, launched into a glorification of modern man. I view him, he said, with a certain unaccountable excitement. In his inner sanctum, as though in his castle tower, supplied the telephones, telegraphs, phonographs, wireless sets, motion picture screens, slide projectors, glossaries, timetables, handbooks, bulletins. He remarked that for a man so equipped, actual travel was superfluous. Our 20th century had inverted the story of Muhammad in the mountain. Nowadays, the mountain came to the modern Muhammad. So foolish did his ideas seem to me, so pompous and so drawn out his exposition, that I linked them at once to literature and asked him why he didn't write them down. As might be foreseen, he answered that he had already done so, that these ideas, and others no less striking, had found their place in the proem, or augural canto, or more simply, the prologue canto of the poem on which he had been working for many years now, alone, without publicity, without fanfare, supported only by those twin staffs universally known as work and solitude. First, he said, he opened the floodgates of his fancy. Then, taking up hand tools, he resorted to the file. The poem was entitled The Earth. It consisted of a description of the planet and, of course, lacked no amount of picturesque digressions and bold apostrophes. I asked him to read me a passage, if only a short one. He opened a drawer of his writing table, drew out a thick stack of papers, sheets of a large pad imprinted with the letterhead, the Juan Crisostomo Lafener Library, and with ringing satisfaction declaimed, "Mine eyes, as did the Greeks, have known men's towns and fame. The works, the days in light that fades to amber, I do not change a fact or falsify a name. The voyage I set down is Autor de ma chambre. Autor de ma chambre. I don't speak whatever language that is, I'm sorry. From any angle, "A greatly interesting stanza," he said, giving his verdict. "The opening line wins the applause of the professor, the academician, and the Hellenist, to say nothing of the would-be scholar, a considerable sector of the public. The second flows from Homer to Hesiod, generous homage, at the very outset, to the father of didactic poetry, not without rejuvenating a process whose roots go back to Scripture, enumeration, congeries, conglomeration. The third, baroque, decadent, example of the cult of pure form, consists of two equal hemistichs. The fourth, frankly bilingual, assures me the unstinted backing of all minds sensitive to the pleasures of sheer fun. I should, in all fairness, speak of the novel rhyme in lines 2 and 4, and of the erudition that allows me, without a hint of pedantry, to cram into 4 lines 3 learned allusions covering 30 centuries packed with literature, first to the Odyssey, second to the Works and Days, and third to the immortal bagatelle bequeathed us by the frolicking pen of the Savoyard, Xavier de Maistre. Once more, I've come to realize that modern art demands the balm of laughter, the scherzo. Decidedly, Goldoni holds the stage. He read me many other stanzas, each of which also won his own approval and elicited his lengthy explications. There was nothing remarkable about them. I did not even find them any worse than the first one. Application, resignation, and chance had gone into the writing. I saw, however, that Denieri's real work lay not in the poetry, but in his invention of reasons of why the poetry should be admired. Of course, this second phase of his effort modified the writing in his eyes, though not in the eyes of others. Denieri's style of delivery was extravagant, but the deadly drone of his metric regularity tended to tone down and to dull that extravagance. Among my memories, this is in a bracket, among my memories are also some lines of a satire in which he lashed out unsparingly at bad poets. After accusing them of dressing their poems in the warlike armor of erudition and of flapping in vain their unavailing wings, he concluded with this verse: "But they forget, alas, one foremost fact: beauty. Only the fear of creating an army of implacable and powerful enemies dissuaded him, he told me, from fearlessly publishing this poem. Only once in my life have I had occasion to look into the 15,000 Alexandrines of the Polyolbion, that topographical epic in which Michael Drayton recorded the floral, fauna, hydrography, orography, military, and monastic history of England. I am sure, however, that this limited but bulky production is less boring than Carlos Argentino's similar vast undertaking. Denieri had in mind to set to verse the entire face of the planet, and by 1941 had already dispatched a number of acres of the state of Queensland, nearly a mile of the course run by the River Ob, a gasworks to the north of Veracruz, the leading shops in the Buenos Aires parish of Concepcion, the villa of Mariana Cambeseres de Alvear in the Belgrano section of the Argentine capital, and a Turkish baths establishment not far from the well-known Brighton Aquarium. He read me certain long-winded passages from his Australian section, and at one point praised a word of his own coining, the color celeste white, which he felt actually suggests the sky, an element of utmost importance in the landscape of the Down Under. But these sprawling, lifeless hexameters lacked even the relative excitement of the so-called augural canto. Along about midnight, I left. 2 Sundays later, Danieri rang me up, perhaps for the first time in his life. He suggested we get together at 4 o'clock for cocktails in the salon bar next door, which the forward-looking Zunino and Zungri, my landlords, as you doubtless recall, are throwing open to the public. It's a place you'll really want to get to know. More in resignation than in pleasure, I accepted. Once there, it was hard to find a table. The salon bar, ruthlessly modern, was only barely less ugly than what I had expected. At the nearby tables, the excited customers spoke breathlessly of the sums Zunino and Zungri had invested in furnishings without a second thought to cost. Carlos Argentino pretended to be astonished by some feature or other of the lighting arrangement, with which I felt he was already familiar, and he said to me with a certain severity, "Grudgingly, you have to admit to the fact that these premises hold their own with many others far more in the public eye." He then reread me 4 or 5 different fragments of the poem. He had revised them following his pet principle of verbal ostentation. Where at first blue had been good enough, he now wallowed in azures, ceruleans, cerulean, and ultramarines. The word milky was too easy for him. In the course of an impassioned description of a shed where wool was washed, he chose such words as lacteal, lactescent, and even made one up, lactinaceous. After that, straight out, he condemned our modern mania for having books prefaced, a practice already held up to scorn by the Prince of Wits in his own grateful preface to the Quixote. He admitted, however, that for the opening of his new work an attention getting forward might prove valuable, an accolade signed by a literary hand of renown. He next went on to say that he considered publishing the initial cantos of his poem. I then began to understand the unexpected telephone call. Danieri was going to ask me to contribute a foreword to his pedantic hodgepodge. My fear turned out unfounded. Carlos Argentino remarked with admiration and envy that surely he could not be far wrong in qualifying with the epithet solid the prestige enjoyed in every circle by Alvaro Melian Lafenor, a man of letters who would, if I insisted on it, be only too glad to dash off some charming opening words to the poem. In order to avoid ignominy and failure, he suggested I make myself spokesman for 2 of the book's undeniable virtues, formal perfection and scientific rigor. Inasmuch as this wide garden of metaphors, of figures of speech, of elegances, is inhospitable to the least detail, not strictly upholding of truth, he added that Beatrice had always been taken with Alvaro. I agreed profusely, and explained for the sake of credibility that I would not speak to Alvaro the next day, Monday, but would wait until Thursday, when we got together for the informal dinner that follows every meeting of the Writers' Club. No such dinners are ever held, but it is an established fact that the meetings do take place on Thursdays, a point which Carlos Argentino Danieri could verify in the daily papers, and which lent a certain reality to my promise. Half in prophecy, half in cunning, I said that before taking up the question of a preface, I would outline the unusual plan of the work. He then said goodbye. Turning the corner of Bernardo de Ergoyan, I reviewed as impartially as possible the alternatives before me. They were A, to speak to Alvaro, telling him the first cousin of Beatriz, the explanatory euphemism would allow me to mention her name. had concocted a poem that seemed to draw out into infinity the possibilities of cacophony and chaos. B, not to say a word to Alvaro, I clearly foresaw that my indolence would opt for B. But first thing Friday morning, I began worrying about the telephone. It offended me that this device, which had once produced the irrecoverable voice of Beatrice, could now sink so low as to become a mere receptacle for the futile and perhaps angry remonstrances of that deluded Carlos Argentino Daneri. Luckily, nothing happened, except the inevitable spite touched off in me by this man, who asked me to fulfill a delicate mission for him and then had let me drop it. Gradually, the phone came to lose its terrors, but one day, toward the end of October, it rang, and Carlos Argentino was on the line. He was deeply disturbed, so much so that at the outset I did not recognize his voice. Sadly but angrily he stammered that the now unrestrainable Zunino and Zungri, under the pretext of enlarging their already outsized salon bar, were about to take over and tear down his house. My home, my ancestral home, my old and inveterate Garay Street home, he kept repeating, seeming to forget his woe in the music of his words. It was not hard for me to share his distress. After the age of 50, all change becomes a hateful symbol of the passing of time. Besides, the scheme concerned a house that for me would always stand for Beatrice. I tried explaining this delicate scruple of regret, but Daneri seemed not to hear me. He said that if Zunino and Zungri persisted in this outrage, Dr. Zuni, his lawyer, would sue ipso facto and make them pay some $50,000 in damages. Zuni's name impressed me. His firm, although at the unlikely address of Caseros and Takurari, was nonetheless known as an old and reliable one. I asked him whether Zuni had already been hired for the case. Daneri said he would phone him that very afternoon. He hesitated. Then, with that level, impersonal voice we reserve for confiding something intimate, he said that to finish them poem he could not get along without the house, because down in the cellar there was an Aleph. He explained that an Aleph is one of the points in space that contains all other points. It's in the cellar, under the dining room, he went on, so overcome by his worries, now that he forgot to be pompous. It's mine. I discovered it when I was a child, all by myself. The cellar stairway is so steep that my aunt and uncle forbade me from using it, but I'd heard someone say there was a world down there. I found out later they meant an old-fashioned globe of the world, but at the time I thought they were referring to the world itself. One day, when no one was home, I started down in secret, but I stumbled and fell. When I opened my eyes, I saw the Aleph. The Aleph? I repeated. Yes, the only place on earth where all things are, seen from every angle, each standing clear, without any confusion or blending. I kept the discovery to myself and went back every chance I got. As a child, I did not foresee that this privilege was granted me so that later I could write the poem. Zunino and Zungri will not strip me of what's mine. No, and 1,000 times no. Legal code in hand, Dr. Zuni will prove that my Aleph is inalienable. I tried to reason with him. But isn't the cellar very dark? I said. Truth cannot penetrate a closed mind. If all places in the universe are in the Aleph, then all stars, all lamps, all sources of light are in it too. You wait there. I'll be right over to see it. I hung before he could say no. The full knowledge of a fact sometimes enables you to see all at once many supporting but previously unsuspected things. It amazed me not to have suspected until that moment that Carlos Argentino was a madman, as were all the Viterbos. When you came down to it, Beatriz, I myself often say it, was a woman, a child, with almost uncanny powers of clairvoyance, but forgetfulness, distractions, contempt, and a streak of cruelty were also in her, and perhaps these called for a pathological explanation. Carlos Argentino's madness filled me with spiteful elation. Deep down, we had always detested each other. On Garay Street, the maid asked me kindly to wait. The master was, as usual, in the cellar developing pictures. On the unplayed piano, beside a large vase that held no flowers, smiled the large photograph of Beatrice in gaudy colors, more timeless of a smile than belonging to the past. Nobody could see us. In a seizure of a tenderness, I drew close to the portrait and said to it, Beatrice, Beatrice Elena, Beatrice Elena Viterbo, darling Beatrice, Beatrice now gone forever. It's me, it's Borges. Oh, this man is so in love. Moments later, Carlos came in. He spoke dryly. I could see he was thinking of nothing else but the loss of the Aleph. First, a glass of pseudo-cognac, he ordered, and then down you dive into the cellar. Let me warn you, you'll have to lie flat on your back. Total darkness, total immobility, and a certain ocular adjustment will also be necessary. From the floor, you must focus your eyes on the 19th step. That's a really important number. Once I leave you, I'll lower the trapdoor, and you'll be quite alone. You needn't fear the rodents very much, though I know you will. In a minute or two, you'll see the Aleph, the microcosm of the alchemist and Kabbalist, our true proverbial friend, the multum in parvo. I don't know what that means. It means a great deal in a small space. Multum in parvo. The one true proverbial friend, the microcosm of the alchemist and Kabbalist. Once we were in the dining room, he added, Of course, if you don't see it, your incapacity will not invalidate what I have experienced. Now down you go. In a short while, you can babble with all of Beatrice's images. Tired of his inane words, I quickly made my way. The cellar, barely wider than the stairway itself, was something of a pit. My eyes searched the dark, looking in vain for the globe Carlos Argentino had spoken of. Some cases of empty bottles and some canvas sacks cluttered one corner. Carlos picked up a sack, folded it in two, and at a fixed spot spread it out. As a pillow, he said, This is quite threadbare, but if it's padded even a half-inch higher, you won't see a thing, and there you'll lie, feeling ashamed and ridiculous. All right now, sprawl that hulk of yours there on the floor and count off 19 steps. I went through with his absurd requirements, and at last he went away. The trapdoor was carefully shut. The blackness, in spite of a chink that I later made out, seemed to me absolute. For the first time, I realized the danger I was in. I'd let myself be locked in a cellar by a lunatic after gulping down a glassful of poison. I knew That back at Carlos, transparent boasting, lay a deep fear that I might not see the promised wonder. To keep his madness undetected, to keep from admitting he was mad, Carlos had to kill me. I felt a shock of panic, which I tried to pin to my uncomfortable position and not to the effect of a drug. I shut my eyes, I opened them, then I saw the Aleph. I arrive now at the ineffable core of my story, and here begins my despair as a writer. All language is a set of symbols whose use among its speakers assumes a shared past. How, then, can I translate into words the limitless Aleph, which my floundering mind can scarcely encompass? Mystics, faced with the same problem, fall back on symbols to signify the Godhead. One Persian speaks of a bird that somehow is all birds, Alanus de Encelis, of a sphere whose center is everywhere and circumference is nowhere. Ezekiel, of a four-faced angel who at one and the same time moves east and west, north and south. Not in vain do I recall these inconceivable analogies. They bear some relation to the Aleph. Perhaps the gods might grant me a similar metaphor, but then this account would become contaminated by literature, by fiction. Really, what I want to do is impossible, for any listing of an endless series is doomed to be infinitesimal. In that single gigantic instant, I saw millions of acts, both delightful and awful. Not one of them occupied the same point in space without overlapping or transparency. What my eyes beheld was simultaneous, but what I shall now write down will be successive, because language is successive. Nonetheless, I'll try to recollect what I can. On the back part of the step, toward the right, I saw a small iridescent sphere of almost unbearable brilliance. At first, I thought it was revolving. Then I realized that this movement was an illusion created by the dizzying world it bounded. The Aleph's diameter was probably more than an inch, but all space was there, actual and undiminished. Each thing, a mirror's face, let us say, was infinite things, since I distinctly saw it from every angle of the universe. I saw the teeming sea. I saw daybreak and nightfall. I saw the multitudes of America. I saw a silvery cobweb in the center of a black pyramid. I saw a splintered labyrinth. It was London. I saw close up, unending eyes watching themselves in me as in a mirror. I saw all the mirrors on earth, and none of them reflected me. I saw in a backyard of Solar Street the same tiles that 30 years before I'd seen in the entrance of a house in Fray Bentos. I saw bunches of grapes, snow, tobacco, loads of metal, steam. I saw convex equatorial deserts and each one of their grains of sand. I saw a woman in Inverness whom I shall never forget. I saw her hair, her tall figure. I saw the cancer in her breast. I saw a ring of baked mud in a sidewalk where before there had been a tree. I saw a summer house, an androgue, and a copy of the first English translation of Pliny Philemon Hollins, and all at the same time saw each letter on each page. As a boy, I used to marvel that the letters in a closed book did not get scrambled and lost overnight. I saw a sunset in Querétaro that seemed to reflect the color of a rose in Bengal. I saw my empty bedroom, I saw in a closet in Alkmaar a terrestrial globe between two mirrors that multiplied it endlessly. I saw horses with flowing manes on a shore of the Caspian Sea at dawn. I saw the delicate bone structure of a hand. I saw the survivals of a battle sending out picture postcards. I saw in a showcase in Merzipur a pack of Spanish playing cards. I saw the slanting shadows of ferns on a greenhouse floor. I saw tigers, pistons, bison, tides, and armies. I saw all the ants on the planet. I saw a Persian astrolabe. I saw in the drawer of a writing table, and the handwriting made me tremble, unbelievable, obscene, detailed letters which Beatriz had written to Carlos Argentino. I saw a monument I worshipped in the Chacarita Cemetery. I saw the rotted dust and bones that had once deliciously been Beatriz Viterbo. I saw the circulation of my own dark blood. I saw the coupling of love and the modification of death. I saw the Aleph from every point and angle, and in the Aleph I saw the earth, and in the earth the Aleph, and in the Aleph the earth. I saw my own face and my own bowels. I saw your face, and I felt dizzy and wept, for my eyes had seen that secret and conjectured object whose name is common to all men, but which no man has looked upon, the unimaginable universe. I felt infinite wonder, infinite pity. Feeling pretty cockeyed, are you, after so much spying into places where you have no business? Said a hated and a jovial voice. Even if you were to rack your brains, you couldn't pay me back in 100 years for this revelation. One hell of an observatory, eh, Borges? Carlos Argentino's feet were planted on the topmost step. In the sudden dim light, I managed to pick myself up and utter, one hell of a... Yes, one hell of a... The matter-of-factness of my voice surprised me. Anxiously, Carlos Argentino went on. Did you see everything, really clear, in colors? At that moment, I found my revenge. Kindly, openly pitying him, distraught, evasive, I thanked Carlos Argentino Dineri for the hospitality of his cellar and urged him to make the most of the demolition to get away from the pernicious metropolis which spares no one. Believe me, I told him, no one. Quietly and forcefully, I refused to discuss the Aleph. On saying goodbye, I embraced him and repeated that the country, that fresh air and quiet were the great physicians. On the street, going down to the stairways inside Constitution Station, riding the subway, every one of the faces seemed familiar to me. I was afraid that not a single thing on earth would ever again surprise me. I was afraid I would never again be free of all I had seen. Happily, after a few sleepless nights, I was visited once more by oblivion. Postscript of March 1st, 1943. Some 6 months after the pulling down of a certain building on Garay Street, Procrustes and Company, the publishers, not put off by the inconsiderable length of Dineri's poem, brought out a selection of its Argentine sections. It is redundant now to repeat what happened. Carlos Argentino Dineri won the second National Prize for Literature. I received your pained congratulations, he wrote me. You rage, my poor friend, with envy, but you must confess, even if it chokes you, that this time I have crowned my cap with the reddest of feathers, my turban with the most caliph of rubies. First prize went to Dr. Eita, third prize to Dr. Mario Bonfanti, Unbelievably, my own book, The Sharper's Cards, did not get a single vote. Once again, dullness and envy had their triumph. It's been some time now that I've been trying to see Daneri. The gossip is that a second selection of the poem is about to be published. His felicitous pen, no longer cluttered by the Aleph, has now set itself the task of writing an epic on our national hero, General San Martin. I want to add two final observations. One, on the nature of the Aleph, the other on its name. As is well known, the Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Its use for the strange sphere in my story may not be accidental. For the Kabbalah, the letter stands for the Ein Sof, the pure and boundless Godhead. It is also said that it takes the shape of a man pointing to both heaven and earth in order to show that the lower world is the map and mirror of the higher. For Cantor's Mengenleer, I don't know how to pronounce that, it is the symbol of transfinite numbers, of which any part is as great as the whole. I would like to know whether Carlos Argentino chose that name or whether he read it, applied it to another point where all points converge, in one of the numberless texts that the Aleph in his cellar revealed to him. Incredible as it may seem, I believe that the Aleph of Garay Street was a false Aleph. Here are my reasons. Around 1867, Captain Burton held the post of British consul in Brazil. In July 1942, Pedro Henriquez Llarena came across a manuscript of Burton's in a library at Santos, dealing with the mirror which the Oriental world attributes to Iskandar Zu Alcarnian, or Alexander Baikorni of Macedonia. In its crystal, the whole world was reflected. Burton mentions other similar devices: the sevenfold cup of Kai Khosru, the mirror that Tariq ibn Ziyad found in a tower, the 1001 Nights, 272, I don't know what that number means, the mirror that Lucian of Samosata examined on the moon, True History 1:26, the mirror-like spear that the first book of Capella's Satyricon attributes, Merlin's universal mirror, which was round and hollow and seemed a world of glass, the Fairy Queen, Part 3, 2:19, and adds this curious statement. But the aforesaid objects, besides the disadvantage of not existing, are mere optical instruments. The faithful who gather at the Mosque of Amr in Cairo are acquainted with the fact that the entire universe lies inside one of the stone pillars that ring its central court. No one, of course, can actually see it, but those who lay an ear against the surface can tell after some short while they perceive its busy hum. The mosque dates from the 7th century. The pillars come from the other temples of pre-Islamic religions. Since, as Ibn Khaldun has written, in nations founded by nomads, the aid of foreigners is essential in all concerning masonry. Does this Aleph exist in the heart of a stone? Did I see it there in the cellar when I saw all things? And have I now forgotten it? Our minds are porous, and forgetfulness sleeps in. I myself am distorting and losing, under the wearing away of the years, the face of Beatrice. That was El Aleph, written in 1945, the same year the Nag Hammadi codices were discovered. This was a translation by Norman Thomas de Giovanni, in collaboration with the author, in collaboration with JD, who is not a perfect literary individual. But, that's the book, which I think is amazing. I think if there's one thing to take away, this is a condensation of Kabbalistic and alchemical principles, which is not, it's like again, there's 3 books I mentioned in the beginning, the Bahir, the Zohar, the Sefer Yetzirah. They are at least 1,000 pages cumulatively, and they're all attempting to explain the same thing. If I could leave off with one more message, it's that does the Aleph exist in the stone or in the cellar, or where is this Aleph? Well, the truth is that the Aleph is within your consciousness. It is behind all the judgment, all the analysis. It is behind all the left brain type thinking. It is behind the alpha and the beta. It's in the theta. The Aleph is in theta state of mind. It is in open-heartedness. It's in the space of relaxation and meditation and insight, inspiration, imagination. You are the Aleph. You are the universe. And this is, I believe, the highest message of all of these mystical texts. What are we talking about when we talk about enlightenment and awakening to the foundational Hindu principle that our Atman is Brahman. You are the Aleph. The Aleph is you. And if we can just learn to use our conscience in a way that we can refocus our attention on the more holistic aspect of ourselves, as opposed to this identity-bound, body-bound, sense-bound awareness, then we can begin to perceive infinite things from anywhere. And I'm not one to bore people with lists. I said that before, and he goes into, where the part where he was like, I saw. It's like, are you gonna list everything that you saw, or how long is this gonna go on? Because the truth of the matter is that history is incredibly long, and existence is eternal, and life is eternal. And so you can be eternally confounded with things that have happened, which is not what we want. We don't want to be confounded. God lead us not into temptation nor confusion, but deliver us from error. And what really, it's like, this kind of is maybe even a little bit of programming, because you see how he, the Aleph at first makes them both kind of scared and kind of slow, and not the best people to be around, and it doesn't benefit their lives, it seems at first. It seems like kind of a traumatic experience that they both have. And then in the end, I suppose the guy started writing and he got published and he got the National Prize for Literature, but by the end of it, he's doubting the authenticity of the whole thing. And so it was the fact that he had to get the Aleph out of his mind before he could begin to write again. And it just seems like they are still not alluding with an I, or with an A, but fucking trying to derail the I'm not trying to talk shit on Mr. Jorge, but I do think that we are definitely the Aleph, and to embrace it fully is actually the right way to go after these experiences, because then once you got the experience, you can use it to benefit your life intensely. Imagine, if you will, being able to perceive the true, objective, actualized historical timelines. Imagine if you could just purvey. I talk to my friend all the time, and he's like, I think like the coolest idea of like a heaven would be to just observe and to just look at the world and go back through history and look at civilizations and get into these situations where dramatic things happen and just understand and just to know what went down, just to know what happened. Imagine how that could alter your life. Imagine never having a doubt about something in the past and having the capacity to sit down in a meditation for 15 minutes and step outside of this timeline and experience years of information, which you can then immediately turn back around and apply to your everyday life. Like, your loved one's never going to be able to lie to you again, or your friends, or like, goodbye all falsities, goodbye all pseudo religions, goodbye all pseudo metaphysical practices, which are these things, these Abrahamic, these faiths, these beliefs, which keep us chained up and slaves to a system which is degrading the planet, the well-being of the planet and the human beings that exist on it. So that's just where I'm coming from. I know the capacity of the mind to access non-local information. God, to me, is like an internal, external hard drive that has the entire database of information in the multiverse. And you just got to get to the point in your mind where you can access the data files, which really there's nothing stopping you. There's nothing stopping me. There's nothing stopping us except for, they say, our belief over what is actually happening. For one, I know it's already happening. You just have to have a thought about something and the answer will be delivered to you. And if you got the ears and the eyes to see and to hear, then you're going to get the answer. Anybody who earnestly asks their creator, their God, their guardian angels for a question or two, or for, I guess you could say, evidence of their presence, will receive it. And partly the reason I'm so convinced about that is because of my grandfather's book, When Hell Was in Session, where he too claims to have gained the experience of communicating with God, Jesus Christ, and the knowledge of God. So that's what we have here, the knowledge of God. I hope you enjoyed that beautiful short story. And if you want to support this channel, there's donating links on my website, or you can buy some plant medicine, jdsPharmacopoeia.com. I will make any plant medicine. I will have a consultation with you so we can create a natural medicine cabinet that can be of use to you in your life. There is other things there. I've got algae now. You can buy live algal starter cultures of spirulina, which is a superfood, and you can also make booze out of it. There is a whole litany of shamanic and medicinal plant medicines. Please do check them out and have a grand existence. Have a grand existence. Thank you very much.